Hello, welcome back to Urban X-Files. Today we are going to talk more about the undead, vampires, and as crazy as it sounds, Merseyside has quite a history of vampires. Some from Anfield and Everton to Huyton to Egbert and Lodge Lane, to remain a few. There lies the skeleton of a man who bit his wife and drank her blood, and until he had a wooden stake driven through him and he was interned face down, so he was unable to escape. This is in the old stories, Everton. Now that was dating back to 1680, the early 1700s. Now this takes us back to somewhere between the 1940s and the 1950s, and it takes us to a Halloween night when there was a gentleman in his 50s who was a home guard who was patrolling his area around the Stanley Park side of Liverpool, when he witnessed someone riding on his bike pretty fast towards him. He noticed it was his old friend. Now, this old friend he had was a bit of a thug who was known how to handle himself and was not one to walk away from a fight, being that type of tough guy. So they stopped and shared a cigarette and talked about various things that were going on, like the war, and it turned out that he'd had some injury during the war where he'd been sent he'd been discharged through his injuries, so he still wanted to serve his country and decided to become a home guard. So after they'd shared a cigarette and a swig of his hip flask, they were talking about something that he'd witnessed on the way. He said, there's some idiot who is flying a kite really low. Now, being during the war, you were supposed to be in darkness and not seen to be having any attention drawn to yourselves, obviously because of the blitz that had been coming down and Liverpool had been getting bombed. So he was on his bike trying to find the source of these kites that had been flying around the sky. So as the two men are talking and they parted ways, just before they were about to leave, the two men had bumped into another one of their friends who was sat on his rounds patrolling the area, and he mentioned about these gliders, and he was convinced that these were to attract German planes to continue the bombing of Liverpool during the Blitz. And he said, well, I actually seen them for myself, and it wasn't a glider, it looked like a giant bird, and it had this screech that sounded like a human, but obviously humans can't fly, so this was it must have been like a giant bat or something, and because we couldn't use any lights and stuff because of the Blitz, I couldn't quite catch what it was. And he looked at his friend and he said, you're having a laugh, aren't you? There's no way you can say that you've seen a giant bird that sounds like a human. It's like, honestly, I'm not pulling your leg. This has happened? I seen this, and I'm not the only person to see this. So, and the other guy come across and said, oh no, it's just a big owl. That's all it'll be, a giant owl. He was like, maybe, but I'm telling you, it sounded like it was a human that was screaming. So, off they went. And then, a few days later, he'd met up again with his friend. He's like, wow, we haven't seen each other for years. Bump into each other within the same few weeks. And the other, before he could say a word, he was like, I have just witnessed something. I've just seen something in the sky, and I heard that scream, that female scream. I heard it, and it's close. What do you mean? He's like, there's something in the sky, and it's screaming. So this sent a chill down his friend's spine. And they went in search to see if they could locate where the sounds of this scream was coming from. And they heard it and realised, hang on a minute, that's not a scream. That's someone laughing. Someone's playing a prank on us here. That's somebody laughing. And it was coming across the park, right by Anfield Cemetery. So the men followed the sound, and it turned out to be located in the cemetery. One of them being superstitious and said, you know what, I think I'd rather leave this. I don't like the idea of going into the cemetery. So the tough guy, who his friend was, had said, oh come on, the dead don't hurt, it's the living that you need to be afraid of. Jumped over the wall, and reluctantly his friend followed behind. Now, they tried to trace down, and they commented and saying it's strange trying to locate this laughing sound, because it's been such a long time since we've heard anyone laughing these days with the war and the devastation that's happening all over the UK, the world. It's a world war. Now, as they went further into the cemetery, the sound didn't quite sound as a funny laughter. It sounded to be more of a sinister laugh. And the screeching laughter ceased, which caused him to be relieved, and he lit up his cigarette and passed one to his friend. And it was only moments later, when they looked up to the sky, that they realised the screeching laughter hadn't stopped, and it was directly above their heads. This was no human. This was a humanoid figure who was able to fly, who had wings, the face of a female, but with red eyes and an evil, sinister laugh. He quickly withdrew his firearm, and he took a shot at this creature. Now, the creature took off at lightning speed. So he took another shot, and he was sure that he hit whatever it was after he heard this evil screech like it had been wounded. Now, they chased whatever it was and found that when they were confronted, it was a strangely attractive, dark-haired woman who had this glow in her eyes. And when they got closer, they seen this woman had sharp teeth and was staring directly at them, almost as if she wanted to be caught, and lured them into the cemetery, and no one else was around. So they both looked at each other in disbelief as this creature got up from the floor, who didn't seem to be hurt by their gunshots. The way she was speaking is how he described is how a snake hisses. It was not communication between two human beings. This sounded like a snake. She looked at the men, ready to pounce. And then whatever it was about to attack when they heard this almighty bang and a flash that seemed to light up for a split second, and they seen that this creature was very pale with these evil eyes, and the flash and the bang had come from a rifle that some man had been tracking into the cemetery and had managed to save these two gentlemen who went to find out what was going on in the cemetery. And it seemed to take a step back as it was hit with this rifle round, because anyone who'd been hit with a rifle round of that caliber and that velocity would have had their head blown clean off. Now, it seemed to, as it was hit, it seemed to writhe in pain and had a hole that had gone right through its shoulder, and it didn't destroy this creature. It gave off a piercing scream as it crashed into the railings, and the two men fired 2 more shots from their pistols, and then this creature seemed to vanish into the night at lightning speed. And then the guy with the rifle had come over to these 2 men and said, "Did you see its teeth? The teeth were like needles. They were so sharp." And the 2 men were quivering. Even the hard knock, it was not feared by anything. They shared the hip flask and continued to talk about this creature that they'd encountered. And they were reluctant to mention it to the home guard when they returned to clock off for the night. They were fearful of being ridiculed by the rest of the team. This was the last time that they witnessed this creature, for it was not seen no more during the war over Liverpool. Was this a vampire? I do not know, for I have to say there have been many stories I have heard over the years in Liverpool from vampires being on the Brownlow Hill, under the tunnels of Liverpool and various other places. Is this maybe the Queen? Who knows? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Take care and see you in the next video.